So thank you very much, everybody. It's an absolute delight to talk about the second year of this fellowship. This is work done jointly between myself and Nick Robinson. Nick Robinson is funded through RISCS as a postdoctoral fellow on this project. So digital responsibility. It's an abstract theme, I think, for many of us. It's a word that we use, but understanding its relationship between security and responsibility and why this responsibility matters has really been the focus of this theme. Right, as a theme overview, we wanted to understand the relationship between responsibility and effective information security. So how does the distribution of responsibilities shape and impact the effectiveness of the security controls that we put in place? And where might we think about having those responsibility conversations when we're thinking about the design and the deployment of security controls? In the first year, we worked with early careers researchers, with policymakers and with practitioners to create focus and momentum. We had a reading group, we ran a number of workshops and reported on that last year. So that helped to build the community, but it also helped us to understand what we mean by responsibility in this context. This picture that we have here is from Alice Angus, shows the sense that many of the practitioners and policymakers that we spoke to showed this feeling that they were having data and technology coming at them from all sides. They had rapid transformation coming at them from all sides. And whose responsibility it was, the way that those arms are held up in that picture, you know, whose responsibility is it? How am I actually dealing with this? This was a very interesting, but also very jumbled picture that came in that first year. And in the second year, we've tried to make sense of that. So our second year programme, we took all that input and Nick and I worked together to create something from it, to use that research, to undertake the analysis and to build two key things. One is that we developed a model through which to examine digital responsibility and security. We discovered in that first year that there were lots of different takes on where responsibility sat, and we worked through that data and we built a model. And then we also developed an approach, a personas-based approach that Nick took the lead on for evaluating how digital responsibility is distributed when we come up with digital transformation and when we look at the security of that. And we're now in the phase of completing a report that will be published via RISCS. We've used the online harms debate as the context for discussing digital responsibility. What we've discovered is that this is an abstract topic, so we need to really ground it. And we've taken the model and we've taken the personas approach, and we've used that to look at the online harms debate and to then see what that tells us about digital responsibility. So the model, so we put it into a triangle because we like triangles in information security. It doesn't have to be in a triangle, this is just a visual, but the point is the layers. And I want to draw your attention to these layers. If we start at the bottom, we've got business and market and business model of platforms. So one of the key things that we learned is that responsibility, the discussions about responsibility start in the market and business model. Before we start creating technologies, before we think about the technologies that we're going to put in place, responsibilities where we're talking about obligations, we're talking about duties, we're talking about obligations to undertake particular actions, we're talking about blame for when it goes wrong, we're talking about obligations to fix things when they go wrong, and we're also talking about responsibility for praise for when things go right, something we're really quite bad at in information security, and we perhaps need to think about that a little bit. But into that bottom layer, into that fundamental layer is where responsibility conversations start to happen. They then come up into the design, the management and the implementation of technology. So the responsibility discussion happens there. There might be a connection with the layer below, or there might not, and this is something I want to return to. And then it doesn't stop there, because then it's what do we produce? What do we create? What's the content that we create from those technologies? The information part of it. How do and where does responsibility sit in that? And again, that tends to be a separate conversation, but also responsibility comes in there. And then we have this macro conversation about the siting of responsibility. The responsibility of the state, the responsibility of the individual, the responsibility of the market, of the industry, of the organizations, and then also the responsibility of society. Digital responsibility happens in all of those layers. The conversations happen in all of those layers. And security, the relationship with security has several roles. One is to reinforce those responsibilities. The second one is to go in and to force responsibility where responsibility agreement hasn't happened. And the third role of responsibility is to identify where responsibilities haven't been undertaken and to identify the blame for that. And the fourth is to shift or move responsibility away from one party to another. So security's relationship with responsibility is pretty fundamental here. So having seen where responsibility sits when we talk about the digital, having looked at the different ways in which the responsibility conversation happens, and having looked at the relationships between security and responsibility, how are we going to take this forward and close out this second year? So we have two case studies that we want to complete. One is the role of digital responsibility in the digitally delivered census. If you remember last year, we delivered a census. The census was delivered in the UK. It was largely digital. This is a universal experience across the UK, which means that we can work with different parts of society to understand how responsibility was negotiated and the relationship that has for the information that we disclose. This is going to be particularly helpful when we think about the design of civic or digital services and the correlation between how we design that and the way in which people deliver information. Refugee resettlement. Now, we've always worked with refugee resettlement. I've worked on that now since 2015. It is, of course, unfortunately, particularly poignant at the moment. We are increasingly relying, we're coming out of COVID into a society that is digitally driven. We're placing an awful lot of faith in the security of our digital services. We think there's a big debate about security, about inclusion of others in our society, and there's a reliance on digital technologies to help with that security. I think RISCS is really at the forefront here to probe some of those assertions. And this case study that we're going to, small case study, will help us to shape some really, I think, important questions that we'll be carrying on for years to come. And of course, we will be completing our report. So in conclusion, what are our key messages? Responsibility is grounded in the underlying economic and resourcing design. And the challenges for security start in that layer. So digital security by design cannot just start at the design of the technology. We do that and we're too late. We have to bring the security responsibility conversation, the relationship between who does what, where duties and obligations are, and how we ensure that happens, which is part of the security conversation. That has to come in to the design of what it is that we're trying to do before we go, the principles, the philosophy, the exchange, before we come to the design of the technology. What we also see, and this is the part that I wanted to raise here, and this picture from Alice Angus shows the really complex way in which digital works across all our lives. And what we're seeing here is that responsibility conflicts, where the responsibilities set at, say, the market level and the responsibilities set at the digital level, where they conflict, security technologies are being used to force one side of the responsibility debate or the other. And where that happens, we're seeing higher levels of non-compliance, we're seeing higher levels of resistance and pushback, and we're seeing the headwinds which security technologies have to work. We're seeing those get stronger, and we're seeing security technologies become less effective as a result. So it is really, NCSE and RISCS were spot on when they looked at digital responsibility, because this is absolutely fundamental if we want a good return on investment, if we want security technologies to work, and if we want the cost of implementation and management to be streamlined and more effective. This is something we need to pay close attention to. So in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you very much to RISCS and to NCSE, but above all to Nick Robinson, who has been absolutely extraordinary in his work with this. You'll notice that we don't have an organisational case study to finish up. We have asked and nobody's come forward. So we're going to go back out after this showcase. I'll talk to Tristan and we will put the call out for some organisational case studies. We would very much like to complete the suite of case studies with an organisational one, and we will put that call out because we know that digital transformation in the workplace, as well as digital transformation in society, digital responsibility, that model that we presented, that applies, that is a that is actually a universal model from all the work we've done, whether we're talking about societal digital transformation, we're talking about business digital transformation, we're talking about government digital transformation. These are the layers at which digital responsibility sits. And finally, just to close, impact. So Anna was very kind and she talked about how digital responsibility has shaped some of the other calls and work that they do, and we're hugely appreciative of that. It is also work that is becoming very important as part of the Digital Security by Design Describe work around hardware security. This is also work that we are bringing in to the next round of safer digital inclusion research. And getting this right will make a big difference, a positive difference for people up and down the country. And I'm really delighted that we've been able to do it. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you for all the support. And I will stop there.